Okay, we're back for video number 2, and what we're going to be doing is practicing value. And like we said in the last video, value is the range of lights to darks on a surface. This is also an element of art, and value is really a magic trick for anything you're drawing. It is what makes your drawings look three-dimensional. So before we start drawing our actual forms, I have my paper turned landscape version. This way, with our last video was portrait style, so you're going to turn it horizontally and put it landscape version. And now I'm just going to draw a really long rectangle after I split my paper almost at the quarter mark. I'm going to draw a long rectangle, and I'm just kind of going to measure and see how many different boxes or squares I can get in this. We're drawing a value scale. This is about 6.5 inches, so I think I'll do, I'll just do, let's see, maybe a little past the 1 inch line. It really doesn't matter how you split this up, just kind of evenly. And so I'm going to get a range of about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 values. That's fine. Kind of eyeball this, split it up into maybe 6 parts. Usually my value scales, I'll do them with 10 parts, but this is fine for today. And so at the bottom, I'm going to start with the darkest value, and I'm going to go up to the lightest value here. I'm going to turn my paper just so that you can see when I'm shading. Now, when you're shading, I like to put my pencil on the paper and then pick it up and hold it like this. I like to hold it so that it's almost parallel to the paper. Some people prefer to grip it underneath. I just prefer to grip it on top. So what I'm going to do is grip it on top and very lightly, not trying to make my paper shiny, I'm going to start going in one direction. And then, as I need to, I will turn my paper to gradually build up my values. So now I have 2 coats of graphite on my page. I'll turn it one more direction, and maybe a 4th. So I'm going to make this box as dark as I can possibly make it, that my pencil will let me without getting really shiny or without allowing my paper to start rippling. Some people push really hard right away, and it makes for shiny surface on your paper. That is when the paper fibers cannot hold any more value, and you know you've gone a little bit too far. So now that I've put, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 different coats, it looks like my paper is starting to get a little shiny, and that means I'll stop right there. So there's my darkest value. Now my lightest value could be the paper color, or very lightly, almost like you're petting a really soft kitty cat that was just newborn, or something so delicate, maybe holding a butterfly. You just don't want to really damage or be too rough with the surface of this. So a very light value. And then we're going to go from dark to light. This is practicing adding value to a flat surface, one value at a time. And then later we can gradually blend them together. If you notice in my video, it's just sort of funny. There's all these shadows going on, shadow underneath my hand. That's actually value on a surface. You can see the shadows. Shadowing is something that we're also going to be drawing today. So I'm going to keep going along. You can watch the video, speed it up if you feel that you understand how to create value on a surface. And I'm getting lighter and lighter as I go, not putting as much pressure down on the page. and noticing if there's a gradual change. Now up here, it looks like I have a little bit too much value. So I'm just gonna lightly take my eraser and take some of the lead, the pencil graphite off. And it looks like I have a pretty good value scale. That looks great. Okay, so after you have a value scale, now we can actually start applying value to our three-dimensional forms. So I'll write form again up here, 3D. And I'm going to draw 4 basic forms. And I just have a circle tracer here just from a mason jar, so I'll use that. It's pretty convenient. You can look around your house and see if you can find something to trace with. Or depending on where you are, maybe you're in the art room, look around the art room to see if you can find something to trace with. It depends on when you're watching this video. And next up, what we're gonna do is use the basic shape of an oval and a rectangle to create the cylinder. These 2 lines are parallel, and then this curve is parallel to this curve down here. Okay, next I will draw my cone. I could have started with my oval, but I started with my triangle. It doesn't matter. You just want to make sure that oval sits inside of the triangle and doesn't go around the edge of the triangle. Okay, and then lastly, my cube. These lines are parallel, and this line in the front edge is parallel to the back edge, and the side is parallel to the back edge on the side. Perfect. All right, so now how do I make these forms really look like they're three-dimensional? I'm going to pretend that I have a light source coming from a certain direction. So I will draw my arrow. The same light source. You could make different light sources if you wanted to. And next up, I'm going to identify when I will have gradual changes and when I will have flat changes. Now, flat-sided objects will give you flat values. So my cube here is the only one that has flat values, which means each of the sides of my cube will have a different value. But here I have rounded objects. They have a curve to them. And so in this case, my values will gradually change. Let's start with the cube since it's sort of the easiest one to do since we just added value scale over here. We're going to do the same thing over here, but we have to identify where is the light source coming from in this direction. Let's pretend the sun was shining on top of a building, for example. Well, the top is going to be the lightest value. And this top is all one value. I would say if I'm going to label these values, it's probably about, if this is 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I would say that the top of this box is probably a level 1 or 2. Now, the side of my box is a little bit further from my arrow, and so I would say that it's going to move down the value scale to increasingly get dark. And so here, what's going to happen is I'm going to pick a number 4 or 5 value. This means I'll probably give it one coat and then a second coat on top. These are layers of graphite. So it looks like this value here matches my level 4 or 5 value. Now this side is going to be the furthest from my light source, and so I'll need to make it the darkest. So I'll go over it once, and I'll try not to scribble, but gradually pull my pencil down my page so that there's no gaps. And then I'll turn my cube and go the opposite direction. This is my second layer, so I'm not trying to scribble or go too fast. Controlling your pencil and the pressure that you create on your paper will give you values that look really rich and deep. And this is what every artist really loves, because value is what helps something look realistic. It's the difference between drawing someone's face and having it look flat, or be able to give it depth and dimension. Now, when you were little, you probably heard people say, don't color in more, or don't fill in or color, scribble, whatever. Don't color in more than one direction. Go in the same direction. Well, the best part about building up your value is because you're building it so evenly that you can color or shade in more than one direction. So I've turned my paper several times, and now I have a cube that has a light value, a medium, and a dark value. This looks very realistic. And the next thing that you're going to want to do is probably add a shadow. And so the shadow in and of itself is going to be away from the light source. And if I had a table in the background, that would tell me where to put my shadow. But the shadow is basically just underneath the cube. And it fades away from the cube just a bit. So it gets lighter and lighter. It's almost a value scale right here on the table. Great, that looks wonderful. Okay, next up is the gradual values. Let's start with the cone. So here, my light source is up here, and the furthest area from the light source will be the darkest, but this is all going to transform from one value to the next. So now it's not flat values anymore like I had with my cube, it's gradual values. So I'll make it dark on the edge and build up my values, and then my pressure will get increasingly lighter as I pull the pencil toward myself. You can even lighten the side of the cone just a little bit if your original pencil line was too dark. So I'm checking to see if I have a number 6 value, and I think I could put it in a little bit more and perhaps bring the value towards the middle just a little bit more. Great. Now underneath the cone, the sunlight cannot get inside. So now I will press a little bit harder. Again, not trying to make my paper too shiny. And this really gives it a richness and a depth. You can see how it's just kind of taking shape. Okay. Now, if my cone was sitting on the table, we wouldn't be able to see quite underneath it. But let's just pretend we're going to give it a shadow here. And what I mean was you can't see underneath it because it's on the table. So actually, if I were going to erase this and make it more realistic for sitting on the table, I wouldn't really be able to see underneath the cone. So I would just have a bottom that was sitting on the table. It just depends on what angle you're looking at it from. So here, I can get right up underneath the cone and start my shadow right away. Curve around, and then fill in the actual form. So this looks like it's sitting on the table better. I could put my horizon line in over here and over here. And you can see now how this cone looks like it's actually anchored to the table. If you're making more of a party hat, go ahead and put that oval underneath. But if you're wanting it to sit on the table and not underneath, you don't want to see underneath it, then just a simple U shape like this underneath the cone would be sufficient. You don't need to complete the oval. All right, next up, the cylinder. Here's my light source again. So I'll start on the edge. I'm looking for number 6 value again, because that is the darkest value that's in my value scale. If I had a value scale that had 10 values or 8, obviously I would use the darkest value. So I've gradually built up. Now I'm going to push just a little bit harder. Once you get more comfortable, you can go a little faster. Again, you don't want to see scribbling, but nice pencil control. So as I'm pulling this toward the light source, I'm going to get lighter. I can go in opposite directions since I did not scribble, gradually building up my values. And then the top of this cylinder is actually closer to the light source, and so I'm going to just very, very, very lightly put in the top of my cylinder. In fact, it might be a little bit too dark, so I can erase just a bit. Okay, so that's looking quite three-dimensional, looks good. Again, I can put my tabletop behind as if this was a soda can or something sitting on the table, and then I will start pulling out the shadow. This is called a cast shadow because the object is casting a shadow on the table. And you don't end it harshly. You very lightly fade away because gradual values fade All right, and then lastly, my cylinder. And so the cylinder is, the sphere is really fun because you sort of shade on a curve, picturing sort of like a smiley face. So I'm going to turn this away from me so I don't get graphite all over the bottom of my hand. And again, the light source, and I want to preserve a highlight right about here. So I'm going to put in a really, really, really fine oval. You can kind of see it there. And then I'm going to rock back and forth, sort of drawing like a smile on my page. And a lot of times people say, when do I know when to stop? Right about in the middle here is where I stop, but I gently curve up toward the sides. Starting with my darkest value and then gradually getting lighter. Moving my pencil back and forth, back and forth. Think of like a crescent moon. Once I have the crescent moon shape, I can start bringing up the values. Still sort of curving them, but they can get a little more straight across, not as drastic. As I go toward the area or the highlight that I preserved or I saved, I won't put my graphite into that spot. So very, very light, like if you're petting a small bunny or a cat, very delicately. You can use your eraser just a bit if you need to at the top. And then go back towards the bottom and one more coat of graphite along the edge, pulling the graphite up towards the middle. All right, this is looking good. I could spend a little more time on this, but I think we're towards the end of our video. I will put the tabletop behind my form so that it's resting on the table, and then I will pull the value underneath my sphere, adding my cast shadow and fading the sides of the shadow away. Pushing really hard to get right up underneath that sphere, making it look very realistic. And I can go back and do the same thing for all of my forms if I want to. The deeper your values are, the more three-dimensional it will look. Really pushing in those values. And all with a simple pencil and paper. Now you can imagine a beach ball, a soda can, a house, perhaps a tree, or even an ice cream cone. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Don't forget, take a picture of this artwork. Just hold your camera right above the artwork. Snap a picture, send it or email it to yourself, put it in your Google Drive, and then when you're in your document, go to Insert, Image, grab your image off of Google Drive and put it in the document. After you have done that and you've uploaded both your drawing from the first video and your second drawing, click the Turn In button at the top right corner, and I will see you when I see you. Bye-bye.